This episode is brought to you by Early Innings, an anthology of the first 4 years of the Twin Bill. Featuring over 200 pages of baseball poetry, short stories, essays, interviews, comics, and art, it tells the story of what it means to love baseball today. The Athletic's Tyler Kepner said, "Like a box of ballpark Cracker Jack, there's a delightful surprise on every page of the Twin Bill's Early Innings. This is a collection to be savored, a loving and lyrical celebration of the art of baseball." Early Innings is available now from 406 Press. This episode is also brought to you by Ben Shahon's Short Relief. It asks the question of what happens when men are not ready to give up that boys' game, the national pastime. In 9 stories, he traces the stories of a minor league pitcher holding on to his last shred of hope for promotion to the show, little leaguers' formative experiences, and a host of men and boys in between. Short Relief is out on 406 Press and available at 406press.com. Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolohan. In the winter when I was recovering from shoulder surgery in Michigan, I found myself with a lot of unexpected free time, which I largely spent going to Pistons and Red Wings games. But our fiction editor, Francois, reached out to me about a friend who was trying to publish a baseball chapbook and wondered if it was something we'd be interested in. Basically, long story short, I realized there weren't really any publishers focusing on sports literature, and that book, Short Relief by Ben Shahon, was our first release from 406 Press. It was so much fun to put together, and I spent a long time hanging out with Ben at AWP. We have a bunch of exciting projects over at 406 we'll be releasing this year. But until then, enjoy my conversation with Ben. Welcome to the podcast, Ben. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Scott.
It's good to hear. It's baseball season's almost here. Well, I guess by the time this comes out, baseball season will be here. So yeah, things are good. Yeah, things are good. So I always like to start off by asking, where does this idea for the book come from originally?
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but one of the books that I really love that talks a lot about like minor league baseball is this book, Where Nobody Knows Your Name by John Feinstein. And it's a book that takes place over the course of one season. It's a kind of survey of like a lot of different stories that were kind of going on around the minor leagues at the time. One of the big ones being like Scott Podsednik and kind of his like last kind of attempted comeback to the show at the end of his career. So that really influenced a lot of like writing about minor league baseball and thinking about it as like its own really kind of distinct corner of kind of professional sports.
So when did you actually start writing these stories?
The first one I wrote was Throw and Slop, and I wrote it in summer of 2018 originally, actually, so quite a while ago. I wrote it to like try to get into like a mentoring program at my school for writing stuff. So thankfully I got in. I got to be a mentee for under the MFA people there at the time for a little bit, and it was great. Learned a lot.
What's your history with baseball and writing? Like, how does this come together for you?
Honestly, I think part of it for me is I always loved baseball, right? I grew up watching and playing and everything as a kid, but as it is with most kids who are not very good, and you can like figure it out at a certain point. So I was like, okay, well, I have to figure out kind of other ways to be like around the game. If I'm not going to be on the field, right? So I spent a lot of time working at the local little league. I was doing like umpiring, working the snack bar, scorekeeping, all the other kind of like adjacent things that like make the games happen. And then I kind of came to writing like independently of that. I was reading a lot of baseball books. I was reading, like I said, the Feinstein book. I was reading Ball 4. I was reading Juiced. Eventually I was like, well, the quality of writing in some baseball books is great, and the quality of writing in some baseball books is kind of not so great. It kind of runs the gamut. So I was like, well, what if I try to kind of put these two kind of interests of mine together and see what happens?
You know, it's interesting. This is a thing we come across a lot, where the idea of baseball literature, like what even is that, and why do we do this? And you actually you didn't publish anything, with the Twin Bill. You went to like more just like general literary journals and things like that. How was the reception for a baseball piece from them?
Yeah, it's actually been pretty good. The only ones that I published prior to the chapbook there was, like I said, Throwing Slop came out, I think in 2021, I think is when it came out originally. I think I submitted it like a few times, but not too many, maybe like 10 to 15 times. Not too unusual for like a regular short story. And then three of the Flash pieces in the collection. Rub some dirt on it, buy me some peanuts, and throw the next one ace. It came out like a year ago in Flash Boulevard, and I think I only submitted that one like a few times. I think that one I sent out the packet of those stories like maybe 3 or 4 times before it got picked up. So I don't know. I think literary journals just want to read good stories, and they don't care if it's about baseball or not about baseball. So I got lucky that they thought my stories were good enough for those times.
That's great.
Yeah.
You're an Angels fan, is that correct?
So I grew up here kind of in like the Long Beach-ish area of Southern California. So I was so far away from downtown. I hardly ever went to Dodgers games, right? But I did go to Angels games here and there. And when I was a kid, they were good, right? Like I kind of started paying attention in like 2002, 2003 kind of era, and they were pretty good for like a decade. They've just kind of fallen sharply off a cliff since then.
Just the most devastating franchise. I don't know, just to see what's happened over the last couple of years.
Infuriating, yeah.
Just unbelievable. And I love going. I've been to a handful of Angels games in my life. I always have a great time going out there. I love the ballpark. It's just a really nice place to see a game. Last time I went there, Ohtani was pitching. It was fantastic. It's just so awful to see what's going on out there now. It really is. And there's no hope. Rough. There's nothing to be hopeful either about. So
we had a slight sliver of hope. I think like 2 years ago, there was some talk in the offseason that Moreno was going to sell, and then we were going to get a kind of fresh start, clean slate kind of program going. But that didn't end up happening, obviously, and now we're kind of just still the Angels.
Yeah. So the copy on the back of the book, you wrote, but there comes a day for everyone when the game catches up with them and they need to call it quits. When did that happen for you?
I kind of realized pretty quickly that I was not very good. So I played from the ages of like 7 to 12, and then moved very quickly into all the adjacent stuff to like making sure games happen. I have 2 younger brothers, one who is 8 years younger than me, and one who is still playing now. He's a teenager. So I helped also like coaching a little bit. I was kind of the assistant for my dad, and like I said, just kind of doing the odds and ends kind of stuff, like running drills, scorekeeping, stuff like that. So I think it was mostly that. It was just kind of realizing like, okay, well, I don't have the hand-eye coordination to like kind of make the sport happen for me, but I do know a lot about the game just from like watching and things like that.
Yeah. And this is a really big theme throughout the book. Almost every story in some way kind of deals with approaching the end and how to do that gracefully or ungracefully. Are there any specific ones that like you really remember coming up with an idea for and having it just kind of like flow from that idea?
I guess the kind of the main trio of the stories, right? Throwing Slop, On Deck, Palo Alto, right? For that one, it actually started out as like kind of a joke a little bit. I was talking with some writing friends, and they were joking that the protagonists of so many like kind of traditional literary stories are like the same kind of guy, right? Like a white dude in his mid-30s going through like some problem about not wanting to grow up in some way or another. So, I started writing Throwing Slop, and I was like, okay, well, let's see what is like a natural kind of avenue for talking about that kind of thing. And like I said before, I've read a lot of baseball stuff, and I've been thinking a lot about baseball anyways. It was the summertime, right? So games were on and things like that. So I started writing it in this way, and I originally intended to write more of these characters and kind of go through like, okay, well, here's a whole team. Let's look at like all these little slices of all these different lives in the game and everything or whatever, right? But the more I was working on it, the more I realized I really just liked this one character. I liked Stevens better than the other ones, which is not great if you're trying to write like an ensemble kind of piece. But I liked his story, and I liked his kind of perspective as someone who is kind of in this like, oh, I'm at the twilight of my career, right? I'm kind of figuring out like, okay, this is it for me.
Yeah, so who is Julius Stevens?
I mean, I think to put it kind of bluntly, he is the guy who never grew up, right? He is the guy who never kind of like gave up the ghost. As far as like, this is what I'm going to be. I'm going to be the next like Nolan Ryan or something, right? I guess era wise, it wouldn't have been Nolan Ryan. That's like 30 years the wrong direction, but but that kind of archetype of a pitcher, right? That kind of like, okay, I am the number one fireball hard throwing guy. Even when that's clearly not working.
I had a feeling that you wanted to make this more of like a character ensemble, especially the way I think it's Throwing Slop where you introduce everybody. And I love it. And it's such a nerdy baseball thing where I think you introduce them and you give their bats right, throws left. And I was like, oh, I love that stuff. Like that makes them seem like a baseball player. I love that. Was that just like, oh, this is fun, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of exactly what you're thinking. Like, it makes it feel like a baseball player. Well, actually, one of the other things I had on hand a lot when I was looking through at this time was I had like an old media guide from like an old Angel season. So I was looking and I was like, oh, every time they mentioned a player for the first time, they do that. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. Let's throw that in there.
Were any of these stories influenced by your life, or are these ideas that you just kind of came up with? Or
I think probably the most personal one here, Around the Horn. Actually, it was the last one we put together for the collection. And we originally had like a different story in this slot that I had written, but we kind of felt like it wasn't working, so we pulled it and I wrote this instead. Around the Horn is a story that kind of means a lot to me because when I was 11, my grandfather passed away, and we were quite close. A lot of time we had spent together was around like sports, right? Watching the games. We watched a lot more football together, but he would always come to my little league games and things like that. But I remember like that night finding out that he had passed, and like I stayed home from school the next day and everything with my family, and then the only thing that was like on my schedule that we didn't cancel was I had a game that day. And my parents gave me the choice. They said like you could go or you could not go, but I felt like I wanted to be there and kind of be outside and be with my teammates and my friends and everything. So that kind of experience of like, okay, well here's like real life kind of crashing into this thing that's fun, this thing that brings me joy, was kind of a feeling that I wanted to capture. I think I got at least a little bit of that across, hopefully, in Around the Horn. It's obviously very different circumstances here, but that was kind of the thing I was thinking about the most when I was working on that piece.
yeah.
Was that
Oh,
day.
I thought you were like sitting on that.
I think I wrote that in like the couple weeks or whatever leading up to when we were putting the final version together.
Oh, that's crazy. Jeez.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I did want to talk a little bit about putting this all together, and I mean, obviously, I I had a role in this.
Yeah.
This was our first release at 406 Press. Thanks for being our guinea pig and kind of rolling with us here as we were trying to figure everything out. It went really well. How did you get to the point where you thought you wanted to publish these, and how did you kind of end up with us?
Last summer, I was hanging out and I was reading through a lot of my backlog of stuff that I had written. And I realized I was like, okay, well, I have a decent little collection of baseball stories here. Not quite enough for like, like a long form release, but something that's like kind of chapbook length like this. And I started looking around and I wasn't really sure where would want these kind of stories, right, in particular, right? Because a lot of them are like, they are kind of about like masculinity. They're about like kind of this, like I said, kind of like arrested development that a lot of these characters are kind of experiencing and things like that, right? And kind of realizing like, okay, well, it's time to kind of put things aside and kind of grow up a little bit. And I know that's kind of like well-worn literary territory in a lot of ways, but I knew that Francois had started working with you guys over at Twin Bill, right? And I known Francois kind of off and on through the literary community in a couple different ways, because like I had published him and Jake, and he and his kind of crew at Roy Fanayot had published me before. So when I bumped into him in, I think it was October, he had a reading I came out to. I mentioned the project offhand to him. I was like, "Hey, I kind of have this thing. Is this anything that you guys might be interested in?" And he said, "Yeah, send it along." And everything's kind of rolled from there.
I remember getting this email from Francois, and he was like, "Hey, do we want to publish a chapbook?" And I'm like, "Yeah. How do we do that? Like, what do we have to do?" Like, and it ended up being a much more complicated process. At least the initial startup was complicated because I didn't realize like the way that we were structured at the Twin Bill. It's like we actually couldn't allocate money to a like publishing company. So it's like, so I have to start. Yeah. So the way we are as a nonprofit, it was a whole thing. It's like I couldn't take money from that to put it towards something else because that's not how we're set up. So I had to start a new company. So and it's funny because 406 was what I originally wanted to name the Twin Bill, but I got really scared because there's like a 406 financial group or something, and I was like, oh, what if they like sue us or something? Like, it's totally different. Like, I was young, I was naive, I didn't know better. So that's kind of how that came about, and I got this email. I was like, yeah, let's do it. Why not? Let's try it. And I'm sitting there with shoulder surgery back in Michigan, and I'm not doing a whole lot. And so then all of a sudden I'm doing a whole lot trying to put together the book and everything. How was the whole process for you? How did you feel this all went?
Honestly, it was great. I love kind of like doing the tinkering with craft and the stories and looking at even like the really little details and things like that. And I think I'm trying to remember, was it like beginning of January you guys sent me the first like marked up manuscript? And it was cool because I got your notes and I got Francois's notes, right? And just seeing like the way that like kind of our three different kind of views on how these stories were working and how they kind of work together and independently of each other. It was really cool to see everyone putting their little stamps on it here and there.
Yeah, I always find that interesting too. I mean, we'll talk about this too, but you edit as well. You edit at Jake. You mentioned that earlier, and to see other editors and how they would approach material, I find that fascinating, and I think it ended up better for it.
I would agree,
because because you get the different eyes on it. It was a really interesting experience for me. I've loved working on this. Putting together the cover was something that I had no idea how I was going to do this. I've never told you this, but that's me on the cover. I am.
I noticed that in the cover copy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's me. I flipped a photo of me pitching so that I'm left-handed like Stevens, and I.
Oh, that's what you meant.
That's me. I'm on. I am literally. I am on the cover. Yeah, I am.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I put that together. Yeah, that's me throwing. I'm pitching in Italy, and I just flipped the image, and I erased the image basically, and created that cover, and it came together really nicely. I thought I was very happy with it. I'm terrified of how to make another cover now. I thought this is so good. How am I going to ever do anything this good again now? I can't. There's only so many times I can use a picture of myself to make a cover. But I did want to talk about Jake a little bit. So how long have you been doing Jake? Tell everybody what Jake is.
Yeah, so Jake is it's another literary magazine. I started it in 2022. So we're going on start of our fourth year right now. And yeah, we publish stuff almost every day of the week, right? Generally Monday through Friday, and then some Saturdays usually too. But publish just all sorts of kind of stuff, right? Fiction, nonfiction, poetry, whatever we find that kind of strikes our fancy.
Is there something that you in particular look for or are drawn to generally with writing?
There's a lot of different kinds of things. So I really like humorous kind of stuff. I really like stuff that's like funny, makes me laugh. I like stuff that like tries to take like weird craft risks, right? Stuff that like kind of goes off the beaten path a little bit on kind of like the fiddly details, like I said before. So anything that's doing something interesting with that, I usually give like a kind of a closer look to. Genre bending stuff is sometimes kind of fun. So sometimes we publish kind of more genre bending kind of pieces.
Do you think you're going to write anything more about baseball ever? Or is this just kind of like, you get it out of your system, or do you think you have more baseball writing in you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll probably write more baseball stuff. I've got kind of another kind of manuscript I've been tinkering with that's more kind of like a novel base. And this one I feel a lot more like comfortable calling a novel, I think, from the outset. I think it's a little bit more focused in its kind of outlook. But it's focused on like Little League stuff in particular. Yeah, so like youth-oriented kind of baseball.
That's great. I think that I was just talking to someone else, and I think that when we talk about baseball, we almost talk too much about Major League Baseball when that's really just a sliver of the amount of baseball happening in the world. And I think most of the really good stories aren't really in Major League Baseball.
Yeah,
it's the fringes. Which I think this book is really about. It is those fringes. It is those. The runaway successes that you see, and I think that's what makes it so interesting. And hearing your background and wanting to be involved with the game, I tell people that all the time. Like, play until it's not fun, but you can still be involved. And I think that writing is a fantastic way to stay involved, and that's not something that people ever think about.
I think writing and baseball kind of make really nice bedfellows in a lot of ways, because like the game is generally considered like, I think, one of the more kind of cerebral sports a lot of the time, because there is so much kind of like start and stop within the sport, right? Like pitch sequencing and right, like defensive arrangements, the shift, like there's always like stuff going on that's on like kind of a minor level that if you're not someone who's like well versed in it, it's kind of hard to find, right?
My wife is pretty new to the game. She didn't grow up with baseball in her life at all, and I don't think she quite understands the story within the game that's happening yet. She's getting there, but it's like how every single pitch, there's so many decisions going into it, and there's so much thought behind everything, and I think that's exactly why. I mean, I love hockey. I'm a huge hockey fan. It's just hard to, it's just go, 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 go. There's very little time for that reflection that you get in these baseball books. That said, I would love to publish a hockey book. If anyone out there is listening and wants to publish 406 with hockey, we will happily do that.
Yeah, and I'll totally agree. Hockey is super fun to watch. I don't know anything about the game, but it is exciting. It is entertaining, right?
Yeah. Well, I feel like you don't necessarily have to know as much. It's like get the puck in the net, and like that's that's it. You know, there's a lot, obviously a lot more going on than that, but you don't need to necessarily know the intricacies of like a 12-6 curve, like, oh, I hung it, or the count. It really does lend itself to writing. What's next for you? What are you working on right now?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned before, I'm kind of like tinkering with like another kind of baseball thing, like a novel. And I'm also kind of just trying to work on stories again, right? Just kind of see, well, what else can I do with like really short form stuff? I've been working on a lot of like really, really short form stuff, kind of flash stuff, and trying to see like what would a collection of like a full length collection of flash stuff look like.
What is it about Flash that you like?
I think it's just that I've been reading a lot more Flash the last couple of years than almost anything else, honestly. So writing it as a form, like one of the things I like about it is that you can go from like idea to finished product very, very quickly, right? You can be like, okay, well, I have an idea for a story. Here's the story. Here's a polished version of the story. You can make a lot more stories that way, right? You can go really fast with it.
Well, Ben, thanks so much for joining us here today. And the book is obviously great. We wouldn't have published it if it wasn't. And I think it's a really fantastic look at a side of baseball you don't always see or think about that much, but is a really important way to view the game. And I think you really captured that. That was Ben Shahon. His book, Short Relief, is available now. And as a bonus, Ben is going to read his short story, Around the Horn, for you.
Around the Horn. You sneak into his room about an hour after he falls asleep. As you sit and watch his snoring, elevated from the odd angle he's at from resting on a glove under his pillow, you start to wonder if it was a good idea to let him sleep at the thing. He insisted that he needed to, that there would be no other way for him to get as bonded to this glove as the last one. You wanted to chastise him for being so foolish, but another feeling swept over you. This one encouraged you to let him be a little boy a bit longer, since, after all, 12-year-olds don't stay 12 forever. You already felt like shit for losing the old glove in the first place, despite encouraging him to take more personal responsibility for his belongings. It still felt bad to let down this boy who expects you to take care of him in these little ways. You reassured yourself that it was okay because you do a good job at the big stuff, especially since your parents skipped town. You've been the best surrogate parent an older sibling could be, even bought him the new glove before the next practice so he wouldn't have to sheepishly ask to borrow one, let him pick up the most expensive one you could afford. Walked him through all his sports psychology visualizations, even though you thought it was mumbo-jumbo. You'll be there for the game tomorrow too, but for now, you'll just let the kid sleep.
We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twin Bill Literary Journal. Until next time,